Water cascaded from the dark sky in sheets. The woman behind the wheel knew nothing about him, not his past, not his pain. She simply saw someone struggling and made a choice that would echo far beyond that stormy evening. Without hesitation, she pulled to the roadside and offered sanctuary to a battered veteran, limping through the downpour. In her modest home, she prepared warm tea, wrapped him in soft fabric, and allowed him to rest on her sofa while her young daughter slumbered peacefully nearby. When dawn broke, he had vanished. No farewell, only a precious medallion left beside the wash basin and a profound silence that lingered. Weeks passed as financial ruin threatened to destroy everything she'd built, her world crumbling around her. Then came an unexpected rap at her door. Standing on her threshold wasn't a stranger. It was the same soldier she'd sheltered. This time, however, he hadn't arrived alone. Welcome to Heartfelt Chronicles, where acts of mercy and human decency unfold before us. Let's discover the truth behind this remarkable encounter. The deluge hadn't ceased for countless hours. Droplets hammered relentlessly against the glass of Sarah Martinez's weathered pickup as she navigated the serpentine country route just beyond Riverside, Ohio, a community so intimate that residents could identify nearly every vehicle in the supermarket lot. This was the sort of a precipitation that chilled you to the bone, even when sheltered indoors. Harsh, unwelcome, and unyielding. Sarah checked the timepiece on her dashboard. 7:45 in the evening. She should have returned home hours earlier. However, the aging transport truck at the cafe where she earned her living had malfunctioned once more, and she'd remained past closing, assisting her employer in securing it against the tempest. Complaints never crossed her lips. Such behavior simply wasn't her nature. At 38, Sarah lived modestly, humble, industrious, and largely invisible to most observers. Her days unfolded behind the register at Miller's Kitchen and Pastries, while her evenings consisted of washing clothes, helping with schoolwork alongside her daughter, and checking on her elderly father downtown. Travel remained foreign to her experience. Social media held little appeal. Her vehicle had seen a decade of service, her footwear even longer. Material wants remained minimal, yet she consistently gave whatever she could spare. Tonight, what she possessed was transportation and a decision requiring courage. Through the shimmering distortion of raindrops on glass, she spotted him, a solitary figure trudging along the road's edge, soaked completely through. His pack clung heavily to his shoulders, its burden forcing him into a hunched position. Even from a distance, Sarah detected his uneven gait, how he favored his right leg with each painful step. He wore forest green outerwear, the type she'd observed only on servicemen and recruitment advertisements. His hair was cropped in military fashion. Shadows in his hood obscured most of his features. She decelerated instinctively, and that's when internal conflict erupted within her mind. One doesn't pick up unknown individuals, Sarah, particularly not when alone, particularly not after dark. That's basic prudence. Yet another memory surfaced, something buried yet familiar. Her grandfather's voice from years past, driving their old Ford along this identical stretch during another storm. When you encounter someone who appears to have been walking considerable distance and nobody else has bothered stopping, perhaps you're meant to be the one who does. Sarah guided her truck to the shoulder. The man showed no immediate reaction. Perhaps he hadn't expected anyone to stop. Perhaps he assumed she was pulling over for personal reasons. However, when she lowered her window partway and leaned across the seat, her voice barely audible above the pattering precipitation, he turned. "Excuse me," she called out. "Are you okay out here?" The man paused. His hood slipped back slightly as he angled his head. That's when she witnessed it. A deep scar extended from his forehead down past his jaw, pale and irregular, resembling old burn damage. He remained silent initially, simply gazing at her, water streaming from his face, his shoulders rising and falling under the pack's weight. "Not seeking trouble," he stated, voice hoarse yet steady. "I didn't suggest you were," Sarah responded. They regarded each other for another moment. Then she pushed the passenger door open with her elbow. "I'm traveling past the base entrance," she said. "I can drop you at the checkpoint." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Appreciated." As he climbed inside, the scent of damp canvas and worn fatigues filled the cabin. He grimaced while lowering himself into the seat, and Sarah noticed how he cradled his torso gingerly, as though it still caused discomfort. His garments weren't merely wet, they were stained. Sirenia, Rzriva. Are you military? She asked gently, pulling back onto the roadway. Was, he replied. Just got released. Sarah glanced sideways. Honorably? He managed a faint smile. Is there any other type? Silence settled between them, filled only by rain's rhythm against metal and the heater's steady hum. My name's Sarah, she offered. He nodded slowly. Marcus. Marcus Thompson. They traveled like that for some time. No radio, no casual conversation, just the sound of two lives intersecting on a road most people had forgotten. She noticed the scar again when overhead lighting flickered at an intersection. It wasn't confined to his face. It continued down his neck as well, disappearing beneath his shirt. She didn't inquire. Some wounds shouldn't be touched, not with words. Are you from this area? She asked instead. No, he said. Passing through, trying to reach Millbrook. That's over 30 miles. Yes, on foot, he shrugged. Didn't have many alternatives. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter. 30 miles in frigid rain, injured, carrying his own equipment, no vehicle, no one to collect him. She felt the ache in that silence. Didn't the VA assist? Marcus released a dry laugh. They assisted me out the door. The base entrance appeared ahead. Two dim street lamps, a corroded sign half covered in vegetation, and a small security station up ahead. I can leave you here, Sarah said, slowing the truck. But Marcus didn't move. He looked ahead at the empty gate, then down at his scarred hands resting in his lap. I don't have identification currently, he mumbled. Lost my wallet during discharge. They said temporary documents would arrive by mail. Sarah blinked. You mean they allowed you to leave a military hospital without transportation and no ID? He gave her a weary look. I didn't say it was an effective system. She sighed, pulling to the side. He reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, she said something she hadn't planned to say at all. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Marcus looked back at her, the same guarded expression. Not fear, just exhaustion, like a man who had learned through harsh experience not to expect anything from anyone. I'll find somewhere, he said. Sarah shook her head. That's not what I asked. 10 minutes later, Marcus Thompson sat at the small kitchen table in Sarah's mobile home, still dripping from the rain. Emma, her daughter, had peeked around the hallway corner once, clutching a stuffed rabbit, before Sarah gently guided her back to bed. She wasn't careless. She didn't leave her child with strangers. But something about Marcus's presence didn't trigger alarm signals. He looked broken, not dangerous, tired in the way only people who had witnessed too much too young ever appeared. Sarah handed him a towel and a warm mug of tea. You don't owe me anything, she said. He nodded, but before she turned away, he reached into his soaked backpack and retrieved something wrapped in fabric. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he unfolded it. It was a medal, worn but intact, bronze with a blue and white ribbon. Purple Heart, Sarah whispered. She simply stared at it, then looked at him. For Iraq? She asked. Marcus nodded. Second deployment. You kept it wrapped like that? I didn't want to lose it. Sarah didn't respond. She just reached across the table and carefully folded the fabric back over the metal, then slid it toward him. That evening, Marcus slept on the couch. She provided extra blankets and left a note on the coffee table with the Wi-Fi password and where to find coffee. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. And in the early morning, before the sun had even lifted the mist off the cornfields, Marcus was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the folded towel left neatly on the cushion and a Purple Heart medal placed quietly beside the sink. Sarah stood there staring at it, one hand on the counter, one hand covering her mouth. She didn't understand it then, but something had begun. A spark, a chain reaction. And in time, that quiet act on a rainy night would circle back in a way no one, least of all Sarah, could have predicted. 14 days had passed since Marcus Thompson departed. The towel remained folded on the couch cushion where he'd rested. The Purple Heart, clean, polished, and impossibly heavy for its size, stayed tucked in Sarah's kitchen drawer next to some pens, spare keys, and a rubber band ball Emma had created in second grade. Sarah hadn't told anyone, not her colleagues at the cafe, not her father, who would have posed too many questions. Not even her closest friend Rebecca, who'd probably wonder why on earth she allowed a scarred, limping stranger into her home at night. Because the truth was, Sarah didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't logic. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't even charity. It was something quieter, deeper, like answering a call she hadn't even known she was listening for. And now in the quiet hours before dawn, her daughter asleep, the heater clicking softly, moonlight casting long shadows across the old linoleum, Sarah felt it. The storm hadn't passed. It had just moved inward. 4 days later, the letter arrived. She found it tucked awkwardly in her mailbox, half soaked from the morning rain. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside was a single line written in blocky, uneven handwriting. "You reminded me I still had worth. I'll find a way to repay that. MT." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no forwarding address. Sarah stared at the words until they blurred. Then she folded the paper in half, placed it inside the same drawer as the medal, and closed it softly like someone laying flowers at a grave. But while Marcus had disappeared, real life hadn't. The notice came later that week, a thick envelope from the regional bank. Sarah didn't need to open it to know what it contained. The foreclosure process had officially begun. Her grandfather's house, the one she grew up in, the one she'd inherited with more problems than walls, was now marked delinquent. A string of missed mortgage payments, rising interest, and ignored letters had finally caught up with her. She'd done everything possible. The cafe paid minimum wage, and not a cent more. Her side business selling baked goods at the weekend market barely covered groceries. She'd sold the jewelry her grandmother left her. She'd canceled internet service 3 times, only to reconnect it when Emma's school required online sessions. She had cut corners on everything except one thing. Emma deserved. The lights stayed on, the heater ran, the walls remained standing. Sarah bit her lip and reread the second page. 30 days. That's what they gave her. 30 days until the place that held her life would be boxed, boarded, and auctioned to the highest bidder. At work, she kept smiling. She poured coffee, stacked pie slices into takeout containers, and wiped down cracked booths at closing time. No one noticed anything different because Sarah had always been the same. Quiet, reliable, kind. But kindness doesn't stop foreclosure. Kindness doesn't pay back loans. Kindness doesn't explain to a 9-year-old why the room with the princess wallpaper might not be hers next month. One evening as she closed up Miller's, Rebecca caught her wiping down the counter for the 4th time. "All right," her friend said. "Tell me." Sarah glanced up. "What?" "You've been staring through people for a week. You forgot Emma's picture day, and today you served Officer Blake his coffee without sugar." "I was distracted." "No," Rebecca said, walking around the counter. "You're drowning." Sarah hesitated. Then she told her, not everything, but enough about the letter, the house, the math that didn't add up, the countdown. She couldn't stop. And when she finished, Rebecca didn't gasp, didn't lecture. She just leaned against the counter, crossed her arms, and said, "Well, that's awful." Sarah let out a surprised laugh. A weak, watery one, but real. "Yeah," she whispered, "it really is." The next morning, Sarah dropped Emma off at school and drove past the town's old American Legion Hall. A hand-painted sign hung out front. "Veteran Support Breakfast, this Saturday. All welcome." She almost kept driving, but something in her chest tugged her foot off the gas. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was the medal. Or maybe it was the memory of Marcus's quiet voice in the truck that night when he'd said, "Didn't have many alternatives." Saturday came. She arrived at the breakfast with a tray of her best cinnamon apple bread, warm and wrapped in cloth. The room inside was modest. Folding tables, metal coffee pots, and a dozen veterans in faded caps and worn denim. They welcomed her with quiet nods. A few recognized her from the cafe. One man, older and stooped, offered to carry her tray. Sarah didn't know what she was doing there, but she stayed. She served. She poured coffee. She smiled. And as she wiped down a table near the back, one of the younger veterans, early 30s, sharp eyes, looked up from his plate and said, "You're Sarah Martinez, right?" She froze. "Yes," she said slowly. The man stood, wiping his hands. "I think you know someone I served with." Sarah's heart skipped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Not a letter. A photo. In it, Marcus Thompson in full gear, desert fatigues, leaning on a crutch, grinning with half his face bandaged, surrounded by 5 other men in uniform. "He sent this a few weeks ago," the man said. "Said he met someone in Ohio. Said she reminded him of who he used to be." Sarah stared at the photo. "I didn't know he had anyone left," she said quietly. The man shook his head. "Marcus doesn't talk much, not since the explosion. But when he does, he means it." He handed her the photo. "Thank you for seeing him. Not many do." That night, Sarah pinned the photo above her kitchen sink. It wasn't much, but somehow it felt like a tether, a thread tying her quiet corner of the world to something bigger, something worth holding on to. 3 weeks passed. The deadline loomed like a silent storm cloud pressing closer with each sunrise. Sarah tried calling the bank, tried extending, delaying, pleading. She was met with polite sympathy and legal indifference. "Unless something changes dramatically, Miss Martinez," the woman on the phone said, "there's not much more we can do." And then came the knock. 7 p.m. Sarah had just finished setting the table. Vegetable soup and grilled cheese. The generic stuff. But Emma loved it. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. There, standing on her front porch, were 2 men in uniform. Not police, not local military. Behind them, 2 black SUVs idled at the curb. And standing between them, even in the dim porch light, was Marcus Thompson, this time in full dress uniform. No rain, no limp, no backpack. Just him and a thin envelope held gently in his hand. For a moment, Sarah didn't move. She just stood in the doorway, one hand still clutching the towel, the porch light casting a warm glow on the scarred face of the man she hadn't seen since that rainy night weeks ago. "Marcus," she whispered, like saying it aloud might make him vanish. He offered a small nod. "Evening, Sarah." Behind him, the 2 uniformed men remained silent. One wore the stripes of a first sergeant, the other a major's oak leaves. Both stood with quiet posture and alert eyes. Not cold, just formal, respectful. Sarah's heart raced, her throat tightened. She looked at the envelope in Marcus's hand, then back to his face. "What? What is this?" Marcus stepped forward slowly, carefully. No limp this time. Whatever injuries had haunted him that night, he'd either healed or learned to carry them better. "It's long overdue," he said, placing the envelope in her palm. "But it's only the beginning." Sarah blinked. "Beginning of what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the 2 men behind him. "Gentlemen." The major stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Major Robert Clark, United States Army. We're here on behalf of the Office of Veteran Community Engagement and the 3rd Infantry Division." Sarah just nodded numbly. Her legs felt suddenly weak. "We'd like to speak with you," he continued gently, "if now is a good time." Sarah stepped aside almost on instinct. Emma, wide-eyed and barefoot in her pajamas, stood at the hallway entrance. Sarah turned quickly. "Sweetheart, it's all right. Just some visitors." The major smiled and knelt down slightly. "Hi there, I'm Robert." Emma held her rabbit a little tighter. "Are you real soldiers?" "We are," Marcus said, kneeling to her level. "But we're not here for a mission. We're here to say thank you to your mom." Emma blinked. "Why?" Marcus looked at Sarah. "Because she changed someone's life when no one else would." They sat around the small kitchen table, Sarah, Marcus, the major, and the first sergeant, while Emma, after much reassurance, returned to her room with a promise of ice cream tomorrow. The envelope still rested unopened in front of her. Marcus spoke first. Sarah, the night you picked me up, I was in a bad place. Worse than I let on. She nodded quietly. I could tell. I'd just been discharged from a VA rehab facility in Cincinnati. Not because I was ready, but because they were full. Budget cuts. Sarah winced. I had nowhere to go. My ID was lost in the fire back in Nevada. I didn't even have enough for a bus ticket. I was walking to Millbrook because a buddy of mine used to live there. I didn't know if he still did. He paused. I wasn't just cold that night. I was done. Sarah felt a chill ripple through her, despite the heater humming behind them. Marcus, but then you stopped, he said simply. You didn't ask what I'd done. You didn't flinch at the scars. You didn't treat me like a burden. You handed me a towel and let me feel like a human being for the first time in months. Sarah's eyes burned. Marcus turned to the others. I wrote my team that same night. Told them something rare happened to me. Something decent. They passed it up the chain. Word spread. The major stepped in. And now, Ms. Martinez, we're here because that act of kindness didn't go unnoticed. He reached into a black folder and slid a single page across the table. It was a formal letter on Department of Defense letterhead. At the top, in bold, Certificate of Community Honor, issued to Ms. Sarah Martinez. Beneath that, a paragraph. For her exceptional compassion, bravery, and quiet service to a wounded veteran of the United States Army, Sarah Martinez is recognized as an honorary civilian contributor to veteran resilience and recovery initiatives with all corresponding privileges and acknowledgments. At the bottom, a golden embossed seal and a signature. Sarah blinked. That's the Secretary of the Army. The major smiled. Yes, ma'am. But it didn't stop there. The first sergeant leaned forward, laying a second document beside the first. This one was smaller, more personal. This, he said, was the part Marcus insisted on. Sarah read it slowly. It was a letter from a private military foundation she'd never heard of, a nonprofit built by veterans, funded through anonymous donors, and it contained one sentence that made her heart nearly stop. This letter confirms full acquisition and forgiveness of mortgage debt associated with the property at 847 Maple Drive, Riverside, Ohio. Her home, her grandfather's home, saved. Tears welled up before she could stop them. Why? She asked, voice cracking. Why would you do this for me? Marcus answered softly. Because what you did that night wasn't just about me. It was a reminder that somewhere in the world, quiet kindness still exists. And that matters to all of us. They stayed for only an hour, long enough to answer questions, long enough to see her smile through the tears, long enough to promise they'd be in touch again. Before leaving, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. I have one more thing. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a metal coin, round, heavy, and engraved. She turned it over slowly. One side held the emblem of Marcus's unit, the other a phrase. She didn't ask, she just acted. Sarah swallowed. It's a challenge coin, Marcus said, usually reserved for acts of valor within the military, but now and then we give them to civilians who remind us what we fight for. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and held the coin close. Later that night, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat by the window with a blanket and stared out at the stars. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering how to hold her life together, wondering if anyone would ever see the quiet ways she fought day after day. And now someone had seen, someone had remembered, someone had come back. For days after the soldiers left, Sarah moved through her life with a strange, almost reverent stillness, like the world had shifted slightly, but only she had noticed. She'd stand at the sink washing dishes and find herself glancing at the framed certificate on the wall. She'd pass the drawer where Marcus's medal still rested, now beside the challenge coin, and feel something warm spread quietly through her chest. Her home was safe. She could breathe again. But more than that, something inside her had changed. It wasn't pride. It wasn't attention-seeking. It was purpose. Unexpected, unfamiliar, but deeply grounding. Word of the visit spread. Of course, small towns didn't keep secrets for long. At first it was just whispers. Customers lingering too long at the cafe counter, trying to make sense of the SUVs parked outside Sarah's house. Then came the questions. Was that really military brass in your driveway last week? You doing okay? I heard something about some letter from Washington. Some folks were just curious. A few were skeptical, but others looked at her differently now, with respect, with recognition. Not the kind you demanded, but the kind you earned when no one was looking. 3 weeks after the visit, Sarah received another envelope. This one was official, with a Department of Veterans Affairs seal on the front. Inside was a short note and an invitation. Ms. Sarah Martinez, on behalf of the Veteran Resilience Network of Central Ohio, we would be honored if you would consider serving as a community advisor to our Civilian Support Initiative. There was a phone number, an email, and a handwritten postscript from Marcus. Just show up. That's all you ever needed to do. Sarah didn't answer right away. She left the envelope on the table for 2 days, staring at it between folding laundry and making grilled cheese for Emma. She wasn't qualified. She didn't have a degree in psychology. She didn't serve. She didn't even know what a civilian support initiative really was. But the memory kept pulling her back. Marcus, drenched and silent, sitting in her truck. The weight in his voice when he said, "You didn't flinch at the scars." Maybe this wasn't about qualifications. Maybe it was about being the kind of person who doesn't look away. Sarah said yes. The meetings were simple at first. She drove to a small office on the outskirts of Millbrook once a week, where a group of veterans and civilian volunteers gathered in a converted warehouse with mismatched chairs and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. They didn't ask much of her, just to listen, to speak when she had something real to say. And over time, she did. She talked about what it was like to grow up watching her grandfather, himself a Korean War vet, flinch at fireworks every July. She talked about how lonely it felt raising a daughter with no safety net. She talked about Marcus, about that night, about what it meant to choose kindness without expecting anything in return. They listened, and they nodded, and slowly word spread. That spring, a man named Walter sat beside her in the parking lot after a session. He was in his 60s, strong shoulders, sun-damaged skin, a stiffness in his legs that hadn't come from age alone. "You know," he said, lighting a cigarette with calloused hands, "I used to think civilians didn't get it." Sarah glanced at him. "Some probably don't." Walter nodded. "But you didn't need to get it to show up. You just did." He took a long drag, then flicked the ash away. "We need more people like that." Sarah looked out across the gravel lot, sunlight bouncing off the metal roofs. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel special. She just felt present. And maybe that was enough. Back in Riverside, life kept moving. Emma turned 10. The cafe gave Sarah more hours and a key to open the store when Miller couldn't make it. Rebecca brought over wine on Fridays and still teased her about being the local hero, but it was always with a smile. Now sometimes veterans stopped by, men and women she'd never met, strangers from other towns asking for Sarah by name. They didn't stay long. Some just wanted a coffee. Some left folded notes. Some just nodded and walked away. But every single one of them had that look in their eyes. The look Marcus had. The one that said, "I didn't think anyone would notice." And every time she did. Then came the storm. Not a literal one, though March brought plenty of rain, but a sudden, quiet unraveling that began with a voicemail. "Hey, Sarah, this is Tom from County Records. I hate to bother you, but there's something odd in the property files. I think you should see. Can you come by when you get a chance?" Sarah felt her stomach turn. The office was dim and cluttered with file boxes. Tom, a county clerk with a forgettable face and too many pens in his shirt pocket, looked uneasy. "I know the Army folks cleared your mortgage," he said, gesturing to a paper in front of him. But when we updated the deed last week, something came up. Sarah leaned in. There's a lien still attached to the land from 15 years ago, before your grandfather passed. Her heart sank. What kind of lien? A loan he took out after your grandmother died. It was buried. No one flagged it because the debt was sold to a private agency. He paused. They filed claim 2 days ago. Technically, they have legal right to the acreage behind your house, including your garden and shed. Emily felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. But the mortgage was just the house, Tom said gently. The land is separate. She drove home in silence, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Back to square one again. Her home was safe, but not her land. And without the land, it wouldn't feel like home for long. That night after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat on the porch and I stared out over the dark silhouette of the fields. The same fields her grandfather once tilled with hands twice as tired as hers. The same shed where she'd stored years of worn tools, preserved vegetables in mason jars, and memories. She couldn't lose it. Not again. She took out her phone, scrolled through contacts, paused, then typed, "Hi, Marcus. I know you've already done more than I could ever ask, but something's come up." She hit send, then whispered into the night, "Please let kindness keep going." Marcus called the next morning. He didn't ask for details, just listened. And then he said, with the same quiet steadiness he had that first night, "I'll take care of it." 3 days later, a man in a charcoal gray suit stepped into the county office. Briefcase in hand, credentials in pocket. He didn't give a speech. He didn't threaten. He simply presented a document bearing a judge's seal and a federal stamp declaring that the lien was invalid. The loan had been fraudulently reactivated. The agency, a shell company already under investigation. It was over. For real this time. Sarah cried in her truck for 10 minutes straight before she could even turn the ignition. Marcus never bragged. When she called to thank him, he simply said, "You already paid it forward. I just made sure it kept moving." Sarah smiled through the tears. "Still, I don't know how to repay you." "You already did," he replied. "You just don't know it yet." Later that week, she found a letter tucked into her mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, what you grow in quiet places will one day feed someone you'll never meet. And beneath that, a single word. Semper. Latin for always. Sarah folded the note, placed it next to the coin in her drawer, and sat in the silence for a long time. Not empty, not waiting, but full of everything that had taken root. By the time summer arrived, the roses had returned to the edge of Sarah's yard. Their scent drifted through the open kitchen windows as bees hovered lazily over the garden. She once feared would be taken from her. The land was hers now, truly hers, and it felt different. Everything did. Not flashy, not loud, but deeply, beautifully different. Sarah stood barefoot in the soil one early morning, a woven basket in hand, lifting fresh tomatoes from the vine. Dew sparkled on the leaves. Chickens clucked quietly near the coop. It was a small scene, one the world wouldn't think twice about, but to her it was everything she'd fought to keep. Her daughter still sleeping peacefully in the room she almost lost. The pantry stocked from a garden no one could take. The porch, once silent and uncertain, now full of laughter most evenings. Life had returned, not just to the farm but to her, and it began, she thought, with a stranger in the rain. Marcus didn't visit often, but when he did, he never came alone. He brought friends, quiet veterans who didn't talk much but built things, repaired fences, rewired her shed, fixed the loose latch on her front gate like it mattered to national security. They never stayed for long, but they left behind something more permanent than repairs. Respect, community, protection. One of them, a quiet man named Eddie, showed up a week after the lien was cleared and wordlessly installed solar panels on her roof. "I didn't ask for these," she said, watching him work. Eddie just nodded. Marcus said sunlight helps things grow. At the farmer's market, people began to linger longer at her table. Some asked for stories, others brought pies. One woman from 2 counties over simply hugged her, whispered, "You reminded my son he still mattered," and left before Sarah could ask her name. They all knew her now, but it wasn't fame. It was something gentler, a kind of reverence reserved not for heroes, but for healers. One Sunday morning, while organizing produce in her stand, Sarah saw a familiar figure approach, tall, broad-shouldered, with a slow, even gait that no longer hinted at pain. Marcus. He was in civilian clothes, simple jeans and a flannel shirt, but his posture was the same. Still a soldier, still steady. She smiled, already walking around the stand. "You're early," he shrugged. Didn't want the strawberries to sell out. She handed him a basket without asking. They sat on the tailgate of her truck beneath the old oak tree near the lot. For a long time, they didn't say much. Sometimes words ruined things that were already perfect. Eventually, Marcus spoke. "I've been asked to take a new position," he said, turning a strawberry stem between his fingers. Sarah looked over. "Where?" "Washington, advisory role, civilian veteran engagement. They want someone who knows what it feels like on both sides." She smiled softly. "That sounds like something you were built for." He chuckled. "I'm still learning." He paused. "I don't want to leave," he added. She looked at him. "Then don't." Another pause. "I also don't want to stay if it means I'm running from what I'm meant to do." Sarah nodded slowly. "So go, but come back when you're ready." He smiled at her like she'd said something holy. That night he helped her clean up after the market. Before leaving, he pulled something from his pocket. A pin, silver simple. It was shaped like a seed. "This is part of a new project," he said. "The Kindness Initiative. Real quiet things, small things. We give this to people who pass it forward." She took it in her palm. It was cool, heavy, meaningful. "I'm not the hero," she said. Marcus stepped back, motioning to the land, the barn, the people around them packing up. "No, but you planted something they'll all grow from." The seasons changed again. Emma started sixth grade with a backpack covered in patches and a new confidence her mother hadn't seen before. The house stayed warm through the fall, powered by sun and stubbornness. And Sarah became a quiet anchor in the lives of others. The veteran support group she once joined became hers to lead. She organized community dinners, helped build a memorial garden outside the town library, connected mothers of fallen soldiers with wives of returning vets. She never made speeches, but people listened when she spoke because she had earned their silence first. One winter night, just after the first snowfall, Sarah was locking up the cafe when a car pulled into the lot. A man stepped out. She didn't recognize him. Young face, pale, shoulders tense beneath his oversized coat. "Are you the woman who helped Marcus Thompson?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. "I was." The man nodded quickly, eyes glassy. "I'm his cousin. We haven't spoken in years, but I read about you in the letter he sent to our family last month." He pulled a folded envelope from his coat. "He asked me to give you this." And then, just as quickly, he was gone. Back home, beneath the quiet glow of her living room lamp,